Tim Mosso, watch specialist, Govberg Jewelers.
And I'm Josh Srolovitz, senior watch buyer at Govberg Jewelers.
Now, Rolex is easily the best known name in horology and a transcendent household name. But all too often, because Rolex is such an institution in the business, people get the impression that Rolex is staid, stolid, dour, maybe just not fun. And we've got watches here that I think are going to blow that preconception out of the water.
For sure, and the beauty of collecting Rolex, once you really get into it, is the hunt for watches with certain colors, special materials, different dials, just things that are fun, unique, and really kind of accentuate one's character.
So what we've got here are actually a bunch of Rolex watches from many model lines and several eras that represent the outlandish, the imaginative, the postmodern, and just the joyful qualities that Rolex can have and, in the mainstream isn't often recognized for having.
Absolutely, and the first watch we have here is part of Rolex, the Cellini collection, and this one's a little bit more unique. It's called the Prince, and it's a quintessential Art Deco piece, modeled after a watch they produced for doctors back in the late 20s, early 30s. And what makes this watch even more unique is not the hand engraved dial, which is beautiful, but rather the exhibition case back. And for Rolex to produce an exhibition case back is extraordinarily rare. And not only is it rare to have an exhibition case back, but also one with manual wind movement, and this watch has all of that going for it.
Yeah, the Cellini Prince is interesting because it does recall the 1920s and 30s Rolex Prince, and the real difference here is that this is a modern watch with modern size, modern materials. The white gold on this watch, being Rolex's in-house white gold, is not plated. It can't wear through to a milky yellow substrate. And built from 2005 to 2015, this is now a discontinued model. It can only be had as a pre-owned watch. Absolutely,
and even as a large Rolex authorized dealer and pre-owned dealer, we rarely see these come through our doors. They really are a unique and special piece. One really should have in their collection.
And it's kind of the best of both worlds, because you have Rolex, the name everyone knows, but you have the model that no one has. So you get the equity of the Rolex name, you have the long-term, security of the value and equity in your watch, but you also have, frankly, the watch that everyone in your office isn't wearing.
Sure, and those are the kind of pieces for Rolex that have proven to be, more valuable down the line. These underdog kind of pieces, the lesser preferred pieces, they're the ones, years later prove to be, really strong collectible pieces.
Yeah, this is the kind of model that people think about 20 years, 30 years down the line. They say, you know what, I really wish I'd bought a Cellini Prince, 5441 back when I had the chance. So this is a watch that's different from the typical Rolex Oyster, and then we're going to jump to a watch that is precisely the typical Rolex Oyster in all respects but one. This is the latest generation of the Oyster Perpetual. Tell us a little bit about this guy and what's going on here.
Yeah, this watch has got Rolex all over it, and what I mean by that is that you have the traditional Oyster case, smooth domed bezel with the ever-loving Oyster bracelet. It's quintessential Rolex. Where you see some more character and a little bit of differentiation is with the dial. Here we have that rich purple, as they call it, red grape dial. And a color like this for Rolex is not too common. It's one they brought back in recent years, and I'm very glad they've done so.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that Rolex has been moving more in the direction of letting its hair down, if I dare say so. A big example of that was the multiplicity of colorful dials with highlights released in the reborn Oyster Perpetual line last year, and also in watches, frankly, like the James Cameron Deep Sea. I think this is a watch, frankly, that shocked everyone, first because of the colors, and second because it was tied so literally to a living person.
Absolutely, of course, named after James Cameron, the director and the Deep Sea fanatic. This watch has some characteristics to it that, by Rolex standards, are certainly audacious. You have that beautiful gradient blue dial that warms into black, and the green rating on the dial, which just adds a lot of flair to it, but it's in a subtle way. It's not overbearing. It's just so tastefully done.
And it recalls an actual event, that little shock of green representing Cameron's own homemade mini sub. When you're James Cameron, you get a watch named after you and you get your own submarine, but anyone can own the watch.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of just changing the look of a very well-known Rolex model, a lot of times with the Datejust, we find that it's so versatile because you can put it on any bracelet, you can get it with any bezel and dial combo, and here we've got one that's decidedly different.
And what you see here that's a little out of the ordinary is not necessarily the plain white dial, which is beautiful, but rather the hand-applied 18-karat yellow gold Arabic numerals. You don't see these too often in the Datejust realm, and it really is fantastic. Adds a little bit of structure to the watch, a little bit of symmetry, see some lines mentally, which makes it appealing, at least in my mind.
Yeah, it's definitely off the beaten path for Datejust design, and the existence of dials like this mean that a lot of times the deeper you go into the model, the more rewarding it is if you're looking for something a little bit offbeat and unique. And that's the common thread with all these watches.
Sure.
If you own one of these, you've got the Rolex that, in all likelihood, none of your Rolex collecting friends have. And honestly, I would say that although it's been around since 1992, the Yachtmaster, especially with a sunburst blue or platinum dial, as in this case, is definitely off the beaten path.
It really is. You have the granulated platinum dial, which is a solid piece of precious metal there. It's stunning in person. The camera doesn't do it justice. Coupled with the relief engraved platinum bezel, the watch has a lot of really nice details that just really make a fine piece.
Yeah, and it has kind of a brother that came out this year at Basel World 2016, whereas this example has red accents with the seconds hand and the name of the watch on the dial. The latest version, similar in all other respects, features the same platinum dial with blue highlights.
Which is pretty, although this one will lend itself to be the classic sought-after one.
It's true.
Down the line.
And it's the watch that people have in their mind when they think of the platinum dial Yachtmaster.
Absolutely.
Now, one other way to go different is to go vintage.
And what you see here is a reference 1803, one of the original Date models. This one here, yellow gold, with the yellow gold Oyster case, presidential bracelet, of course, and the lovely champagne dial. It just screams 1980s. The coolest part about this watch is the Spanish, day indication, which kind of makes one think of, an Escobar type character. Put a lot of cool history to it, and it just, it's very commanding, but in a very respectful kind of way.
Yeah, the thing about that watch is that there are two things going on. There's the vintage status, which makes it immensely appealing to collectors. And then there's the joy of finding all the different language variants of the date, because you do have the text of the week. I think upwards of 26 languages over
Correct.
the years. Mm-hmm. So again, if you want something really different, look for one in Portuguese, look for one with Arabic.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll even find, royal signatures on the dial.
And those are fantastic, and it just goes to show that with any one of these model lines, the hunt is limitless for different configurations and special models.
You don't just have to look for off-the-wall models, like models that are just so manifestly different, like the Cellini Prince. Sometimes it's finding the variations on the most common models, like the Datejust and the Date, that are the most rewarding.
For sure, and here we have just another example of that. The yellow gold Rolex Daytona, and this one's really kind of neat. It's a little bit more vintage, and I say that because this one has the Zenith El Primero chronograph movement, not the in-house Rolex Daytona chrono movement. It's fantastic. You have the gold trim on the subdials, which matches the case, that stark black dial, and the gold writing. It's just another period piece that lends itself so well to just something different.
And it's also important to note that when you're trying to be different with Rolex, Daytona with a El Primero movement definitely is that. Many people say, oh, well, an in-house movement must be more desirable, but the counterintuitive logic is that because Rolex was dependent on Zenith for movements, they couldn't make as many Daytonas as they liked. So we wind up finding the Zenith movement Daytona is fairly scarce compared to the in-house, which is, 16 years into its production, virtually unlimited.
And let alone that it's arguably one of the best chronograph movements ever made, and of course Rolex trusted it for nearly 20 years. It's just it's a full-on piece.
And it's rare because it does use Rolex's own balance, Rolex's own hairspring, Rolex's own winding system. It's rare to find an El Primero that's a chronometer, and in the Daytona it is that. Plus, to find a solid gold Daytona, there's a fair number of two-tones out there. And despite its rarity when it was new, there's still a fair number of steel ones out there. But to see a Zenith-powered Daytona in full gold is truly a treat.
It's special, absolutely. And speaking of little more nuanced special pieces, if you take a look at a fairly common reference, 16613, you start looking a little bit more closely, you realize this one's not so normal. And then the reason being, it's a very early reference, 16613. How do we know? Well, if you look at those markers on the beautiful blue dial, they're more the nipple-style markers, where they're a little bit smaller, a little bit more kind of a period kind of style to them.
And the other thing that's important to note is that this is a pre-alphanumeric serial, so this is This is a 1987 watch before the introduction of the R code before the serial number. So not only is it iconic of its era, the two-tone, really I would say the two-tone Submariner alongside, perhaps co-equally with the date, is the icon of the 1980s, alongside, you know, wearing a Armani jacket with a t-shirt in Miami Vice, Magnum PI and the 308 Ferrari. The two-tone period Submariner gives you that cool.
And yeah, Rolex really doesn't do too much in the way of, hasn't done rather, special materials on the dials aside from the Yachtmaster. And within the Yachtmaster family, yet again, you have a beautiful two-tone 40mm example here with a gold bezel rather than platinum. On the white dial, however, you're going to see black onyx markers, which are just so stunning to see in person, and it's I think the only time they've done this, to my knowledge, in their collection.
Absolutely, and one of the bonuses too is that the Yachtmaster, compared to the contemporary Submariner, the Yachtmaster has much larger indices. So not only is it a dramatic contrast, but you get the individual onyx markers so much bigger than those indices would be on a Submariner. So it's a perfect combination of a dramatic treatment on a watch that really favors the details of the dial. Plus you have that solid precious metal bezel Yachtmaster fashion. This is a watch that is miles removed from the aesthetic of a steel Submariner. And if you've got that raffish flamboyance and you're looking to indulge that, a Sub just might not do, and the Yachtmaster might be the watch for you.
And exactly, and from, as Tim said earlier, from bathing suit to business suit, it really covers all your bases in one watch.
Now, we've got two watches that are really a variation on one watch, and neither one of them is a run-of-the-mill Rolex.
For sure. These are both current reference Rolex Milgauss pieces. One with the black dial and white markers, the other white dial with orange markers. These are super cool, super retro, very unique, very un-Rolex kind of watches. If you look more closely here, you see how it's the same case, same movement. The watches are completely different. They give different vibes, and having both of these in your collection is in no way a waste of space.
And it's important to note that while some feel that the orange accents the dial, some feel that the lightning bolt shaping of the seconds hand is maybe a little bit postmodern, maybe a little bit too cute. You should also note that the original Milgauss was quite a daring watch in its day, featuring the same lightning bolt seconds hand, featuring certain variants with honeycomb dials, versions that had brushed metallic dials, versions with and without rotating bezels. So it's always been an audacious model line.
And an audacious watch with extraordinarily high value on the auction scene. And these are nothing short of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people reach for a rotating bezel Rolex sports watch, and they can overlook the Milgauss, which is a shame because with the symmetry of its dateless dial, this is done because there's an iron core around the whole movement and they didn't want to open another aperture. That shields the watch from magnetism, but it also produces a very handsome, dress-appropriate timepiece.
It sure is. It's balanced, well executed, and just a no-nonsense kind of watch.
Now, to be entirely clear, you can go even more outside bounds of reality with Rolex. If reality is the steel, black-faced Submariner, rotating bezel, meat and potatoes, well, you can get, I would say prawn, caviar, and avocado with something like a contemporary Milgauss Z Blue. Now we've completely thrown away our inhibitions.
Yeah, talk about audacity. You have a standard Rolex Milgauss with a striking blue dial, orange accents, and a green crystal.
Yeah.
It's just so un-Rolex, and that makes it Rolex.
And I think the message that you take away from the proliferation of Rolexes like the Cameron, like the red grape Oyster Perpetual, like the Milgauss Z Blue, is just that Rolex is getting more audacious and itself beginning to embrace that side of its character. It's not all straight-laced.
Absolutely.
And so it's becoming more and more a thing among enthusiasts to try to find a way to differentiate themselves. And fortunately, contemporary Rolex on the pre-owned side, everything from current list models like the Oyster Perpetual to the James Cameron to discontinued models like the Cellini, there's a wealth of pre-owned options. Yeah,
it really is limitless, as we said. Within each family, there are so many different configurations over the years. Once you get the bug, it will follow you around for the rest of your life.
Well, thanks so much, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
for joining us.